The Premier League has a new superstar, and his name is Jhon Duran. This guy's story is a truly inspirational one because, in very little time, he went from absolute poverty to becoming one of the most feared strikers in the Premier League. No, scratch that, in Europe. Let's look at how this kid from Colombia has already become a real nightmare for defenders at the tender age of 20. This is the story of how Jhon Duran became the most feared striker in Europe. As always, let's start from the beginning. Duran was born in Antioquia, Colombia, but while he was still a kid, he and his family moved to Medellin, the second biggest city in the country. He always had a passion for football, but his family was poor and it was difficult for him to officially break into the sport early, as he couldn't afford all he needed. Most players join academies as early as 5, 6 or 7 years old, but Duran didn't join any academy until he was 11. But when he did, he joined Envigado and he rose through the ranks rather quickly, making his first team debut at the age of 15. On his third appearance, he scored his first goal for the club, and that made him the second youngest goal scorer in the history of the Colombian league. He was just 15 years and 8 months old and had already started breaking records. Little did he know that it was going to be the theme of his entire career. At this point, not many had heard of him, but he was rising so fast. By October 2020, he was featured in The Guardian's list of 60 best young talents in world football. And just 3 months later, he made his big break. And believe it or not, all that happened by mistake. Well, it wasn't that big of a break. In January 2021, just a month after he turned 17, he reached an agreement with MLS club Chicago Fire. But he would officially make the move in January 2022. He was bought for £1.5 million. But how did he get the deal? One word: luck. Chicago Fire's technical director Sebastian Belzer was out in Colombia to scout another player. But he saw Duran and his mind was blown. He immediately signed the kid, brought him over to the US and was determined to turn him into a superstar. Duran made his Chicago Fire debut in February 2022 and scored his first goal for the club 3 months later. We all thought that Duran would have to put in the work for years in the MLS before earning a move to Europe, but all he needed was a year. After just 1 year playing in the US, he was able to make his big move to Europe, which announced him to the world. In January 2023, Aston Villa agreed to pay Chicago Fire £14.75 million for his services, which meant that the American club had made a profit of £13.25 million in just 1 year. That was how quick Duran's growth was. But that growth slowed down once he stepped foot in Europe. People who knew him thought he would hit the ground running in the Premier League because of his skill set. He's strong, fast, good in the air, and a very good striker of the ball. These are attributes required of strikers in the Premier League. But in his first season in England, the signing felt like it was a huge mistake. Duran made 12 Premier League appearances and failed to score or even assist a single goal. That season, he had more yellow cards than goal contributions, and it felt like Aston Villa had been robbed by Chicago Fire. And you couldn't even blame it on the language barrier or anything, because, he was coming from the US, where English is spoken. So, how on earth did this kid go from being a flop in his first season to being a real thorn in the flesh of Premier League defenders in just 1 year? We'll tell you exactly how that happened in a second. But first, if you're enjoying this video so far, slap a like on it and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, bear in mind that Duran moved to the Premier League halfway into the season, and it's generally always difficult to adapt to a new club, new league, new country, new style, new everything without preseason. And just imagine how much worse it would have been for a teenager. So, it was no surprise that Duran suffered in his first few months in England. But after a proper preseason and time to settle into the new league, we began to see the beast. He made his first appearance of the 2023-24 season in the Premier League against Everton, and he marked it with a goal. He came off the bench and played just 16 minutes, but that was enough for him to find the back of the net. And the goal was a pretty one, too. That would become the theme of this kid's career in Europe. He quickly became the guy who would come off the bench and score beautiful goals. But if you thought that was a beautiful goal against Everton, you're in for a shocker later in the video. He made his official European debut in the Europa Conference League, playing against Legia Warsaw in a group stage game, and he scored just 6 minutes in with a header. By the way, he'd previously scored in the qualifying rounds of the Conference League that season, but this was his first goal in a proper European competition game. But this was only the beginning of his story. If you thought his first Premier League goal was good, then check out his second. This was a home game against Crystal Palace, and Aston Villa had gone behind to a 47th minute Edouard goal and just didn't seem to be able to find a way back into the game. So, what did Unai Emery do? He turned to the bench and brought in young Jhon Duran, hoping he would dig them out of this mess. And well, the 19-year-old striker came in and did exactly that, scoring the equaliser in the 87th minute. And it was one hell of a goal, an absolute banger. And it brought Villa back into the game. Aston Villa found some inspiration from Duran's goal, and they went on to win that game 3-1. That beautiful half volley would end up being named Aston Villa's goal of the season. The goal was so good that it got a lot of people super interested in the new kid on the block. Everybody wanted to see more of him. Everybody wanted to know who he was, but it just was not to be. He suffered an infection and later a hamstring injury, which heavily limited his game time that season. He would return in the second half of the season, and guess how he announced himself? With an absolute golazzo from the edge of the box against Ajax in the knockout rounds of the Europa Conference League. He was well and truly back. Duran would brilliantly finish the season, scoring against Premier League and European champions Manchester City in April, and then putting two past Alisson in the game against Liverpool in May. The Liverpool performance was truly special because Duran came off the bench with Aston Villa 3-1 down, and he single-handedly turned things around to help Villa leave with a point, an inch closer to Champions League qualification. We were looking at a proper big game player. And it was so crazy. This guy was on the pitch for just 11 minutes, but he ended up having the biggest impact, scoring 2 goals from outside the box against one of the toughest defenses in the league. He was showing that he was indeed a super sub. In the 2023-24 season, Jhon Duran played a total of 462 minutes, which is roughly the equivalent of 5 90-minute games. And he scored 5 goals, most of them bangers. His insane ball striking and ability to impact games from off the bench made him a huge target for clubs around Europe that summer. At some point, it felt like he was certainly going to leave Aston Villa, with clubs like Chelsea and West Ham very interested in him. That summer, he did the West Ham Hammers gesture during a live stream, which caused a lot of controversy as it seemed to send the message that he was on his way out of the club. But he ended up staying. As fate would have it, the first game of the new Premier League season was against West Ham, and of course, he scored. He came off the bench in that game to grab the winner for Aston Villa in the 79th minute. That goal silenced those who said that Duran was only a one-season wonder and wasn't worth all the hassle the clubs were going through to try and sign him. It also made Aston Villa fans super happy that they were able to keep this guy. But that was just the beginning. Duran would end up scoring 4 goals in his first 5 Premier League appearances, coming off the bench to score each one. His goal against Leicester turned out to be the winner, while his goal against Wolves was the clincher to complete a comeback. But the talk of the town was his goal against Everton. Aston Villa had gone 2-0 down early in this game, but they managed to crawl back into it thanks to a brace from Ollie Watkins. But the job wasn't done yet. Duran came off the bench in the 69th minute, and just 7 minutes later, he did the unthinkable. This kid unleashed an insane shot from 30 yards out, and boom! Top bins! That goal right there broke the internet. It was an unbelievable goal. It was one thing for Aston Villa to pull off a comeback from 2 goals down, but to complete the turnaround with a goal like that was just insane. That screamer was named Premier League and BBC Goal of the Month, and it's a front-runner for Goal of the Season. After that banger, we thought we'd seen it all, but little did we know that we'd not even seen anything. There were a few doubters who were trying to belittle that goal by saying he could only do it against a team like Everton. And how did Duran respond? He waited for the biggest opponent that Aston Villa would face and decided to unleash another madness. Villa were drawn to face Bayern Munich in the Champions League, and of course they went in as the underdogs. But they managed to hold their own and stop the German giants from scoring. But Emery wasn't satisfied with just 1 point, he wanted all 3. So what did he do? Like he'd done many times in the past, he looked to his bench and sent in his super sub, his joker. And that joker didn't fail. Duran came on in the 70th minute, and just 9 minutes later, he produced another 30-yard banger. But this time, it was on the biggest stage, against one of the biggest teams in the world, and against one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time. It was that night that Jhon Duran turned every single person into a believer. That day, everyone agreed that he was him. That goal was enough to give Aston Villa all 3 points, thereby ending Bayern Munich's run of 41 games without losing a single Champions League group game, the longest run in the competition's history. More so, that golazzo made Duran the player with the most goals from off the bench in all competitions in Europe's top 5 leagues in the 2024-25 season. And since his debut for Aston Villa in 2023, only Lautaro Martinez can boast more goals from off the bench in all competitions in Europe's top 5 leagues. In such a short time, Jhon Duran has managed to rise to the top, and although he's just 20 years old, seeing him getting ready to come off the bench already sends shivers down the spines of defenders and even fans all over Europe. Honestly, this kid is destined for greatness, and it feels like it won't be much longer before he moves to a big European club. He has all it takes to fit perfectly into any style or tactic. Of course, his ball striking is no joke, but apart from that, he has brilliant off-the-ball movements. He can dribble, carry the ball, create space for himself, bully defenders, and will always be an aerial threat. He's also a hard worker who often drops back to help the team defend when needed. You could compare him to a player like Erling Haaland. Haaland's box positioning and finishing might be better, but Duran is a better striker of the ball and is much better from long range, making him a slightly more valuable tool to have than Haaland when you're up against a low block. No doubt, Jhon Duran is one of the most exciting young strikers in the world. But do you think he's the most feared striker in the Premier League right now? Or is there someone else who deserves that title? Also, where do you think he'll be playing next year? Which big club will snatch him up next summer? Tell us in the comments. Anyway, now that you've heard about one of the best young strikers from South America, let us tell you about the greatest ever striker from South America. If you want to know how good prime Ronaldo Nazario was, click this video and we'll tell you the whole story.